Good afternoon. This is Daniel here with Cop Watch TV. Just want to welcome everyone back in. And yes, just so you know, we are back to Cop Watch TV. We wanted to go back to our old roots with our OG name. So again, this is Daniel here with Cop Watch TV, and we're going to be doing the live show today. We're really going to discuss and go over some of the most interesting issues in policing and just some of the most fascinating police cases from the last couple weeks. Now, I was out of town the last couple weeks, so I know that you all missed me and we missed you as well. Just want to see where everybody is watching from, and we do have someone in, Anita from Norway. All right, we have Sergeant George. Good to see you again, sir. Doggy Deb is from Northern Nevada, and Bob Sacamano. My guess is he is Kramer's neighbor in New York City, so that is a great place to watch from. We got Integrity News is from they're just citing some case law already. Very interesting. Kathy Hughes from Minnesota. All right, Kathy, you know, one of the first cases that we're going to talk about is from Minnesota. And just so you know, if you haven't already, please go ahead and follow us and subscribe to the channel over at Cop Watch TV. Then make sure you share it with friends and family so we can go ahead and get as many people into these live shows. Because one of the things that I like to do in these live shows is not just talk about the news, but I want to have discussions, because it could be possible, especially with the controversial cases that I'm going to talk about today, that you may have a different feeling about these cases, or more importantly, you may have a different opinion about some of these cases, just not what the police should have done in the moment, but also what should the government do in order to make policies and laws to kind of control police behavior and what police officers should do in emergencies. So yeah, definitely go ahead and follow us over at Cop Watch TV, and make sure you send it to all your friends. And again, my name is Daniel. You can follow me everywhere at Police Law News, except for TikTok. My TikTok account was just banned, so I started another TikTok account under Officer Involved, so you can follow me there. But everywhere else, go ahead and follow me over at Police Law News. All right, so the first case that we're going to get into, and this one is a wild one. You know what? I don't say this too often, but this is the kind of case where the possibility of George Floyd type riots, that's what we might be looking at here in this case. One of the reasons is because this actually happened in Minnesota. So we're going to go back to last month, really not that long ago, on July 31st, 2023. So just a couple weeks ago, or last week or so, a Minnesota state trooper was on patrol at night, and the state trooper observed a vehicle that was driven by an individual named Ricky Cobb II. Now, the reason for the traffic stop on the highway was because the vehicle didn't have any taillights. Now, the first thing that I want to say about this is that driving without taillights is against the law, okay? It's a dangerous thing, especially at night, because you can imagine a situation that as other vehicles are coming up to you, they're not going to be able to see you. And it's possible that if you slam on the brakes or hit the brakes, that other vehicles might not be able to stop. So it is a dangerous thing. But, it is one of those things that unless someone tells you your taillights are broken, you might not realize it. So also, there's really no intent behind it. So again, it's not a serious crime, but it's definitely an infraction of the law. And when a police officer stops someone, and in particular, when the Minnesota State Trooper stopped Mr. Cobb for driving without taillights, it was a legal and lawful traffic stop. So the police officer or state trooper did make the traffic stop, contacted the driver, Ricky Cobb. Upon contact with Mr. Cobb, they found out after running his name through just the regular police databases that he was basically in violation of a DV protection order. So, in really thinking about believe all women, we should really take these things seriously. So, he was in violation of an order of protection. Right there is definitely a reason for a police officer to detain him. Also, what police officers found when they ran his name is that he was wanted. He was the suspect of a felony domestic violence case. So, essentially, a different agency, a sheriff's department still in Minnesota, essentially went into the system and put a hit on his name saying, hey, this individual is wanted for questioning in a felony crime. So what the Minnesota State Troopers did in this case is they didn't just go ahead, run up to him, get him out of the car at gunpoint, throw him in handcuffs, and do anything like that. The Minnesota State Troopers actually went above and beyond, which, I could say above and beyond, or you could say they actually just did what cops are supposed to do, but don't always do. They got on the phone, they actually called that sheriff's department, and they said, hey, we just want to make sure before we go ahead and detain anybody or, take away anybody's rights by taking them into custody, we're out here with Mr. Cobb, and we just want to make sure, is this still valid? Is there still probable cause to detain detain him for this felony domestic violence crime. The sheriff's department said, yes, absolutely detain him. So the police officers at this point did have a legal reason to detain Mr. Cobb to place him under arrest. That's important because, again, without that reason to detain him, without that lawful objective, my opinion is almost always going to be use of force that occurs when there's no lawful objective. I'm going to be real critical of the police officers there. So lawful objective, the lawful reason why a police officer is taking away someone's rights, that is unbelievably important to me, and it really should be important to everyone. So the police officer goes back to the car and tells him to exit the vehicle. Well, this wouldn't be much of a story if Mr. Cobb just got out like a reasonable person and, displayed basic human decency, got out of the car and cooperated with the police officer. I probably wouldn't be talking about that, because that situation where people cooperate with police officers when the cops are reasonable and the people are reasonable, that happens, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of times a day, and everything always goes pretty much as it's supposed to when no one gets harmed, and then we don't talk about it here on this live show. But, of course, Mr. Cobb, he decided that he was above the law and he wasn't going to cooperate. So what Mr. Cobb did is he said no. Police officers asked him multiple times, and the body camera of this is available. I did watch it 3 different times. I was able to see on the body camera video that the officer told him to exit the vehicle. He actually refused to exit the vehicle. So it was at that point that the police officers made the decision, okay, we are going to try to get him out of the car. Now, before that, the police officer did ask Mr. Cobb to hand him the car keys. This is twofold. One, because you don't want Mr. Cobb to try to flee the scene. So basically, it makes it safer not just for the police officers, but also for Mr. Cobb, and also it makes it safer for all of the other drivers on the road in order to try to prevent flight. So the police officer did ask for Mr. Cobb to shut off the car and for the keys. Mr. Cobb, again, he refused to do that. Shaquille O'Neal, yes, Mr. Cobb was an African-American man. So he, to Mr. Cobb, inside of the vehicle trying to get Mr. Cobb into custody. As Mr. Cobb started to drive away, he's basically dragging 2 police officers with him. So that's a situation where it doesn't take a whole lot of thinking or knowledge about any of these issues to know that if you're in a car, inside of a car, and the driver starts to go forward, that's a situation where the individual being dragged by the car, one, could be dragged, and that could lead to the individual getting run over. So that could lead to serious injury or death. So now we have a situation where any reasonable person would say, hey, the police officers could reasonably be facing serious bodily injury or death. So the police officer who was on the passenger side, they immediately jumped out. They made contact with him. They called for an ambulance or to try to get him help. However, Mr. Cobb did not survive. He was killed. There have been protests. What they decided to do, protesters decided to do, is they went to the governor's mansion. So where I went to law school was in St. Paul, Minnesota. Great town. My law school was actually only a few blocks from the governor's mansion. So a lot of times I would be at school on Summit Avenue there in St. Paul, and I would do my daily run right past the governor's mansion. But there were a whole bunch of protests outside the governor's mansion. That's where they decided to do this in order to try to put pressure on the governor, because the governor is actually the one who is in charge of the state police. So this wasn't a local police department. It's, the Minnesota State Troopers are essentially run by the governor's office in that particular state and in most states. So what ended up happening is that the police officers are put on leave. Everybody wants the police officers to be charged with civil rights violations and criminal charges. My guess is that the police officers are going to take some heat for this, and we'll have to see what happens. But I'm really curious to see, what does everybody think? So in a situation like that, again, if you want to criticize the police, which you should, and especially some of the cases we're going to talk about here in a second, yeah, we should be criticizing what the police officers do. But what I think is so important is, in that moment, I want you to, this is what I would like, because this is where I think the most important and interesting dialogue is. It doesn't make any sense. Like these protests, what they're saying is the police are bad, they're heavy-handed, the police are racist. Well, again, with no evidence of that, here's what I want you to say. At this point, the police officer did this, they should have done this. And I do the same thing for Mr. Cobb. Okay, so Mr. Cobb did this, but he should have done that. And all police officer utilizes deadly force at that point, I'm good with it. I don't want anybody to die, but I can look and say, okay, that's objectively reasonable. Again, because the police officer is basically looking something that could cause them great bodily injury or death. And, that's basically what the law says when a police officer can utilize deadly force. So if that's the case, if that's what's happening, I'm good with it. Now, if the car drives away and is driving away from the police officer and the cop is shooting at the car as it's driving away, I'm not good with that. That's obviously problematic. So what happened in this case? Well, from the body camera footage, and we have body camera footage from 3 different police officers on scene, including the officer who shot, including the officer who was on the driver's side, and we have dash cam video from a police car that was essentially behind that was able to catch all of it. I've watched all of the video. To me, it seems like the shots were fired as the officer on the passenger side was still inside the car. That's when the shots were fired. If that's the case, to me, it seems like the police officer had a reasonable belief that he was in immediate danger of death or great bodily injury. So to me, it seems like it's a reasonable, lawful, justified officer-involved shooting. Let's see what you all have to say. Jose says, I think officers should be letting them go, secure warrants, and arrest later. Once a person is identified, no point of pursuing. Jose, I like that. That makes sense. So Jose, I'm gonna push back a little bit. So if police officers, so what should police officers do? So Jose, a lot of people say what you said, and I don't disagree. But Jose, what ends up happening is that the person goes home, and then the police officers get a warrant, and then the people refuse to come out of the house. So the police officers have to force their way into the house with a warrant. Now that's when, not you, Jose, but that's when a lot of people say, how come police officers are kicking in people's doors? They had this guy in a traffic stop. They didn't even try to arrest him. They just let him go. And here, in the meantime, he's committing all these extra crimes. Now police officers are kicking in doors. So again, it's difficult what you do as a police officer. Now, what I would say is that in a situation like this, I think that the police officers told him to get out of the car. They also tried to get his keys. At that point, making one attempt to try to physically remove him, I don't think that's an unreasonable thing for police officers to do, because again, everybody who runs, you can't just issue warrants for all of them unless you want to say, okay, we need 50,000 more police officers in the country in order to go after all these warrants. Like, it just isn't reasonable. But I like that you're thinking outside of the box. Let's see. Shaq says, did you go to Mitchell Hamlin? Shaquille O'Neal, yes, Shaquille O'Neal. I went to Mitchell Hamlin School of Law between 2015 2019. I did their part-time program. It's an amazing place to go to law school. Steve Ladner says, pulling people over to take cash and other valuables is playing a deadly game, I guess. But Steve, this guy had a warrant, or not a warrant, but this guy was wanted as a felony domestic violence suspect. So he had also violated a protection order. So it's just one of those things. Also, I think it's important to say that pretty serious criminals like Timothy McVeigh, the reason that he was caught was because of a traffic stop. So police officers definitely do stop a lot of cars. They get a lot of people off the road on traffic stops. All right. So Ego 10 says, basically cops need to be trained to the point that they're legal experts with knowledge equivalent to a judge, while at the same time being capable of surgically lethal at the drop of a hat like a Navy SEAL. Ego 10, thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, so sometimes Ego 10, and I think this is what you're saying, because I agree with you, is that the expectation of police officers just isn't reasonable. So basically what they want is they want cops to have this ultra warrior mindset, but then they also want them to be like kind and nice and reasonable, and they want police officers to strike this absolutely perfect balance. When something like Uvalde happens, they have to go in like Navy SEALs, but every other situation, they want cops to back off. Again, it isn't a reasonable expectation. One more from Sergeant George. No doubt the Minnesota State Troopers tried to handle the situation the best they could, but Mr. Cobb made things difficult for them. I agree with you 100%. Now, what's interesting in this case is there's actually kind of an offshoot case, I like to call it, with this. That is it's a little funny. The only reason it's funny, well, no, it's funny. It's just funny on its face, but no one was injured, and that's one of the things that I really like about it. So what happened after this is, again, people were protesting this case, but one protest was actually a little strange. So what one individual did, and they haven't identified him yet, he went on one of the highways out there, I-94. in Minnesota. And basically, during the middle of the day, this individual was walking in the middle of traffic on a highway, stopping cars on a highway. So not safe to do. And basically what he was doing, he was harassing and accosting drivers in the name of Ricky Cobb. He was making drivers, he was saying, say his name, Ricky Cobb. This is all captured. Not only was it captured on like a state highway department like cameras, but he live streamed all this on Facebook, which is, absolutely insane. When someone, because obviously this is a crime to do, right? So when people video themselves committing crimes, it's almost like when police do silly things on body cameras, and I'm like, you're filming yourself doing the silly thing. So this guy, he was in the middle of traffic, and everyone who refused to stop, like 99% of reasonable people wouldn't stop in the middle of the highway for some maniac telling them they had to say something. He was calling them racist. Again, these people were just driving. They had no idea what this maniac was saying, but he was also taking pictures of license plates and saying license plates and, trying to get other maniacs to go to these people's houses and stuff like that. So police did go. He was arrested. He was arrested for misdemeanor. I think he probably should have been charged with a felony, but he was charged with like misdemeanor harassment and impeding traffic or something like that. But that's a pretty silly one. Now we have what else I want. The other ones I want to talk about today are two. Let's see if we got any comments on that. Let's see. Cajun says, just let go and you won't be dragged. Okay, well, I mean, Cajun Randy, I appreciate that, but that's easy to say when you're already in a car. And you're holding on to someone for the car to just kind of take off at a high rate of speed. Again, this is kind of what I talk about. It's like an unreasonable expectation of a police officer. The human body can only react so fast, and believe it or not, a car accelerating forward can actually respond quicker than a police officer can, especially if the police officer is holding on to things or part of their uniforms in the car. So the idea that you're just going to jump out and be fine, like, isn't reasonable. Not only police officers, but people have been killed when drugged by cars. So it is a deadly force situation. There's no question about that. So, but just that you say, just let go and you won't be dragged. I'm going to take it one step back and say, don't drive away from police officers and drag them, and you'll be okay. If you exhibit basic human decency when interacting with police officers, you're going to be okay and you're going to be alive, which I really appreciate. We won't have a whole lot to talk about on the show, but that's okay. I'd rather have people be alive. So we have two cases I want to talk about that are interesting things with tasers. Now, listen, I love taser cases. I think taser cases are so interesting for a lot of different reasons. It's because it's really just like the paradigm, the whole concept of the intermediate weapon system. So when I was doing my undergrad back in 2003, 2004 at Western Illinois University out there in the middle of the cornfields in Macomb, Illinois, I had a professor who was one of the deputy chiefs of police of Los Angeles Police Department before he went to teach. And this is going back 20 years. He basically said, for at this point, 20 years ago, he said, all right, so for 50 years or however many years, police officers have had a baton and they've had a gun. And you can imagine situations where, a gun is too much force and a baton, that isn't enough for police officers in order to resolve a situation safety. So police officers, police departments, police leaders have been just trying to find this perfect intermediate weapon system, and we haven't found it. And at that point, the taser hadn't been around that long, but at that point, Dr. Cronkite said that the taser is probably the best that we have, And here we are, 20 years later. I'm going to be honest, in my opinion, the taser probably is the best intermediate weapon system that we have for police officers, that police officers can carry on their belt, take with them to calls for service, and it isn't like a 40 millimeter that has to be slung and stuff like that you really reasonably can't take on every single traffic stop or every call for service you take inside someone's house. So the bowler wrap is pretty good too, but I think the taser probably is still the best that we are going. Hey, Daryl, how's it going? That is probably the best that we are going to do. So I love taser cases. I think they're so interesting. ACM reports actually studied the use of tasers between like 2018 and 2021 in Los Angeles Police Department. What they found is that taser deployments, that 40% of the time they don't have the desired effect. So essentially, for one reason or another, which we don't have to get into now, just take my word for it, or go read APM reports. They did a whole study on it. It's really interesting. But 40% of the time, tasers don't work for one reason or another. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So when it comes to the taser, the first case I want to talk about is in in Vancouver, Washington. So this happened on May 21st in Vancouver, Washington. So police officers in Vancouver, Washington were sent to a call for service in reference to a shoplifting at Walmart. So essentially lost provincial Walmart call said, hey, there were two individuals who shoplifted, gave police officer the description. Police officers were actually able to get there pretty quick, and they made contact with loss prevention. Loss prevention said, those two people right there, they are the ones who did the shoplifting. So police officers did what you would expect them to do. They tried to contact the two individuals saying, hey, police department, you're being detained right now. One individual decided to run away, but the other individual decided he wasn't going to run. He decided he was going to fight. So that's cool. His name is Elijah Guffey, and he is 21 years old. So two different police officers, a male police officer and a female police officer, they tried to get Mr. Guffey into custody. Now, what's important is that they didn't just approach him randomly and just start going hands-on. No, they said, hey, we're with the police department. You're under arrest. You're being detained. So, it's not like he didn't know what was going on. And he told the police officers no, and he immediately started to fight with the police officers. He punched one of the police officers in the face, and he kicked the other police officer in the chest. So police officers were eventually able to wrestle him to the ground. Once on the ground, so he's on the ground, he's on his back, but he's still resisting arrest. He's not letting them put him in handcuffs. And he started to taunt the police officers. He said something to the effect of, yeah, I'm only on the ground because I let you. So he's still taunting the police officers. And you know what? He was a strong guy, because he was right. He was able to overpower the police officers during the handcuffing process. He stood up and again started to fight with them and started to try to run away. At that point, one of the police officers utilized a taser. And this time, the taser actually worked. The taser worked. He fell down. Police officers get him on the ground. Now they're fighting and they're wrestling with him again. So now let's look at it from the point of the police officers. You have someone, he's already punched an officer in the face, kick the other officer. So we know he has the propensity to not just try to get away, but to actively attack police officers. So he actively attacked the police officers, and he already overpowered the police officers once. So the police officers, again, don't want all of this to happen again or for it to go bad. Also, I just want to point out, we've seen situations before where police officers have lost fights, and during those fights when a taser is out, I think the Garrett Rolfe case, when a taser is out, if bad guy, and Elijah is a bad guy, if bad guy gets a hold of the taser, well, at that point, now we're in a deadly force situation. One of the things that I want with doing these shows and all of the social media content I do is I want there to be less use of force, especially serious and deadly use of force between police officers and individuals. That's what I want. I want less people to get hurt, police officers and citizens. So that's what I want. I don't want police officers to use excessive force. I don't want police officers to use a taser a little too early in a situation. I don't want that, okay? But what I really don't want is for police officers to not use enough force, get into a situation where then they have to kill someone utilizing deadly force. That is what we should all want to avoid, and I hope that we're all on the same side of that. Because here's what this female police officer did. It was a little unorthodox, a little strange. Actually, I'd kind of like to see what kind of training manual she had for the taser curriculum. This is going to get weird, real quick. What the female police officer did is while they're wrestling him on the ground. Now, this guy, he kind of had pants that sagged. It's one of those things. Some people do that. So as his pants were kind of sagging, his pants were almost falling down. Well, what this female police officer did is she pulled down his underwear, pulled down his pants. She put the taser to his genitals and said, stop, or I'm going to tase you in the nuts. I'm not joking. I mean, that has to be the quote of the week. It's crazy. She says, I'm going to tase you in the nuts. At that point, he says that he gives up. She didn't tase him in the nuts, which is good. Okay, it's good she didn't do that, and they were able to place him in handcuffs. Now, a couple things on this, okay? Was that the right thing for the female police officer to do? No. And the government shouldn't be giving people vasectomies. No, I'm not for that. Of course not. Let's not be silly. So did the female police officer, let's just talk a higher level. Is this a good look for the female police officer, the police department? No, of course not. Now, the end result, that he was eventually put in handcuffs, there was no serious use of force, and he was pretty much uninjured. Yeah, I like that result, but no, I don't like what the female police officer did. I feel like she felt that she had no choice because he had already overpowered them, and she was this kind of thinking out of the box. And also, I think that there is a difference between saying you're going to tase someone in an inappropriate place and also tasing someone in an inappropriate place. Had she actually put the taser to his genitals and energized it and tased it, yeah, well, we would obviously be having a different conversation. So yes, there are different areas that you're not supposed to tase on an individual. And yeah, I mean, there are different areas in that you're not supposed to tase. The genitals is obvious one of those cases. And police officers, there was a case in Albuquerque, I remember about a decade ago, where an individual attacked an Albuquerque police officer. The officer defended himself and kicked the individual who's attacking him in the genitals. Ended up losing a testicle, and the individual ended up getting like a 6-figure settlement. Kind of bullshit, but yeah. So I mean, police officers do get disciplined, and people can sue for excessive force in these kinds of cases. But the individual said, so what ended up happening with this case is that the police officer, not only is she on leave, but she's facing criminal charges. She's facing assault charges. All of the criminal charges against the actual bad guy, the 21-year-old shoplifter, the shoplifting, the evading the police, the battery on 2 police officers, all of those charges were dismissed. He's the real criminal. So I'm going to say I think that's absolutely bullshit. I'm really curious to see what she thinks. Pursue NYC has the best comments so far. She went nuts with her taser. She actually absolutely did, Pursue. Thank you so much. Integrity News, qualified immunity, so smart. So Integrity News doesn't know what qualified immunity is. And that's why they made that comment. I've written articles about it. I've covered it a lot on here. So why don't you send me a message, Integrity News, over at Police Law News, and we can go ahead and I can educate you on qualified immunity, because that has nothing to do with this case. Sorry. Anyways, so with this case, again, so I think where the assault charge comes from. So, I think a lot of people know, but assault is basically the threat. If you say, I'm going to punch you, and then you make a motion to do it, but don't actually do it yet, it's right before you're going to do it, and a person is in fear. So the victim has to be in fear that the actual battery would happen. And then a battery is when you actually make contact. So she was charged with assault. So what that seems like to me is she was basically charged for the threat that what she was going to do with the taser. That's what she was charged with. I don't agree with her being charged. Now, is that a violation of department policy? Yeah, it probably is. Now, could she go into an internal affairs interview and say, hey, yeah, you know what? I get it's a violation of policy that I didn't want, but I felt like I have no other option because of these reasons, because we tried this, we tried that. He already battered 2 police officers. He already overpowered us once. We didn't want to get into a Garrett Rolfe situation where he took one of our tasers and we had to shoot him. So again, would she be fired for something like that? No. Is she going to get some time off and some training? Yeah, probably. That's honestly what I think is appropriate for this case. I don't think she should be criminally charged. And all of the charges that Elijah did, I don't think those should be dropped either. Because basically what you're saying is, hey, just so you know, if you go ahead and commit a crime, resist arrest, batter 2 police officers, try to run away, and if the police officers aren't 100% perfect when they're trying to deal with your dumb ass, then you're going to get all your charges dismissed. So I don't think that's behavior that we should be incentivizing. I don't think I don't think that is something that we should be incentivizing. All right, we have a couple minutes left. I'm going to talk about one more case. We might cover this a little bit more next week, but this is the other Taser case, and this one is absolutely wild. Happened in Larimer County, Colorado, back in February, but the body cam video just came out. It's absolutely crazy. February 23, individual's name is Brent Thompson, police officer with Larimer County in Colorado, initiated traffic stop on the vehicle. And Mr. Thompson, again, none of these cases happened because people were just minding their own business, being decent humans. What Mr. Larimer did, what Mr. Thompson did is he lied to the police officer about his name because he was driving on a revoked license. So when we see what happened, I'm going to say, so basically all of this is going to happen because you didn't want to go to jail for driving on a revoked license. It's absolutely nuts, and you're going to see why. Nuts, just like the other case. So what happened with this case is he gave the police officer the wrong name. So police officer had the reason for the traffic stop, just misdemeanor traffic stuff, and then also the not the correct name, so concealing identity. Police officer officer told him to get out of the car. Got Mr. Thompson got out of the car. Police officer told him he was under arrest. This is at night on a highway. Instead of just cooperating, the individual runs from police. As the police officer is running behind the individual, the police officer said, "Stop or I'm going to tase you." Now this is just a side note. If you're running from a police officer and they say, "Stop or I'll tase you," why don't we just go ahead and believe them, okay? Because if Mr. Thompson had taken that seriously, then this wouldn't have happened. So what happened is that what happened is that as he's running, police officers pretty far behind him, but there's basically one of those silver like grates to enter the highway, because they're kind of running through like a little grassy arroyo, and they get to the top. Once the individual, Mr. Thompson, as he's going over the silver grate onto the highway, he trips, and that's when a police officer is able to close distance on him. So police officer is then finally close enough to make good on the promise to tase Mr. Thompson. He does. He tases Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson, he actually ends up falling in the middle of the highway, and at that point, there's nothing the officer could do. The officer sees pretty much the worst thing that you could possibly imagine seeing in this moment. You see a car coming towards you. It's a highway. It's dark. There's no lights. There's a car coming right towards where the officer and Mr. Thompson are. The police officer takes out his flashlight. He tries to, but he literally has a second to react. There's nothing the officer could do. And what happened is the car actually rolls over Mr. Thompson at 50, 60, 70 miles an hour. He did sustain fatal injuries. With this case, the police department investigated, and they found that the police officer didn't violate any policy. Also, they found that the DA said that the police officer, what the police officer was doing was legal. He had a legal reason to try to detain him. Tasing someone who's running away isn't against the law. It's not. And so the DA said they're actually not going to prosecute the police officer either. The police officer is back at work. I think that's probably the correct thing. It's definitely not criminal on behalf of the police officer. Should there be some kind of a policy violation? I don't know. Let's see. Tegrity says, "Why don't you bring up the dog bite video where the cop sent a dog to attack a semi-truck driver that's clearly obeying their commands?" Oh, that is such a great point. We are going to talk about that case next week. That's what we're going to lead with. But just so you know, that police officer, he was fired, and I think he's looking at charges as well. I actually did cover that on my Instagram channel, just so you know. So I think that video on my Instagram channel has over 100,000 views. So go ahead and check it out there over at Police Law News. But more importantly, we are going to cover that dog bite case in full detail next week on the show. One last thing before I go, what I want to say about tasers and people running away. In general, even though it's not illegal, and some police departments have a policy against it, some don't. But my personal opinion on this, curious what you guys think, my personal opinion on this is, unless an individual is the charges where the individual is considered to be a violent fleeing felon, I do not think it is a good idea for police officers to tase people who are running away. Again, it's not illegal, and in most places, police officers don't even have the training to say don't do it. I think it's a bad idea. The reason why is that as you are running away, when you are tased from behind, you lose all control, especially if it's a hard surface. You're basically going to land on your face. I've seen people get serious brain injuries, even though that's not what the police officer intended to do. So again, unless it's a violent fleeing felon where you can articulate the danger to other people, again, not illegal, not always against policy, I just don't like it, okay? I don't like police officers tasing people who are running away. So that's kind of where I am here on that issue. I know a lot of people don't agree. Officer Blue Gun, good to see you, sir. Let's see. He chose to run for a stupid reason. What did he think was going to happen? Yeah, I always think it's like in Fight Club where, after Bob dies, he goes, what did you think was going to happen? Exactly. Well, that's going to be the show for today. Again, I really want to thank everybody. I really want to thank everyone for being in. Make sure you tune in next week. Again, 12 o'clock Mountain Time, we'll be on with you guys. And again, the case that we're going to lead with is, in this case, it's going to take a little bit longer. We may even have the video for you. But the case that we are going to lead with next week is the dog bite case. And it's an absolutely wild case, a really, really interesting case. So please, if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, Cop Watch TV. Make sure you share it with your friends. Again, I'm Daniel. You can go ahead and follow me over at Police Law News. And I hope everybody has a great and safe weekend. Thank you so much for the participation, and we'll see you soon.